Some have called this island a black hole. So today we're going to be looking at Vostok Island. It's an uninhabited, shark-infested, remote coral island. And zooming out a bit, we can see where it is. It's part of the Line Islands of the Republic of Kiribati, specifically the Southern Line Islands. There's not a lot of population in this immediate area, and a lot of these other islands around here have really interesting history, but today we're just going to be focusing on this island right here, Vostok Island, which some people do have interesting theories on, including that it's been censored for some reason, and that there's secret government activity occurring here. Others have speculated that the black color is due to the Pisonia trees, which give it a dark green outline. Some others have said it was just a bad picture taken by Google Maps. Well, in this video, I'm going to look at what the internet and old newspapers have and try to use more primary and secondary sources to find out what's going on this island and see if we can learn anything about the history of this place. Let's start by just clicking on it in Google Maps and see if anything comes up. Immediately, you see some people with reviews on here. This person says, save and share quickly before they make everything disappear. The truth is out there. There's also something referencing it to a black hole. But there also are a couple pictures on Google Maps, just 2 of them. And when you look at it, it doesn't look as dark as it appears in Google Maps. Trees are a little dark, but not really. They're mostly green. I don't think Google Maps is going to show us, so let's look at some other mapping websites to see what they have. Okay, so I went to Google Earth so I could see if there's any historic imagery of this place. Maybe there's another date that has a different picture on it. And the main picture on here does seem to be that same pic. Looks like it was taken in January of 2009, and that's the only pic that Google Earth has of it. So let's check something else. So now let's use trusty old Apple Maps. This sometimes shows these uninhabited islands a lot better. Vostok Island. There is a base in Antarctica called Vostok, which maybe I'll do a video on in the future. Here's Vostok Island. You can see that same triangular shape. And when you look at it, it's obviously not that deep black color. It's a lot more vibrant and green. You can actually see a little bit of what's going on the island. Some of the soil appears to be dark over here and then also on this side of the beach. If you look on the northwest part of the island, you can see what seems to be maybe trails or erosion of some sort. There doesn't appear to be any buildings or structures on this place, at least on the surface. So let's use some primary sources and look at some old newspapers to see if anyone's ever commented about being here before, if this has been historically inhabited by people, or if anything has gone on here recently. I know this is not a primary source, but I wanted to see if Wikipedia had any images of this place, and it appears it does. The island does have a kind of creepy appearance in a way, even though there's really nothing going on in this photo. Looking through some other pictures, this is like a zoomed in picture near the shore. And here's what the interior of the island looks like, and another picture of the shore. So I didn't want to just read Wikipedia, so I looked at some of the primary sources it gave. This was one of the first ones to come up from Pacific Islands Monthly, written in 1966. It's a whole article about this place's history, so I'll just look through some of the interesting bits. It's one of the few islands in the Pacific that had never really been inhabited before, and only a few people have even stood upon it. It kind of makes sense that no one has ever been here. If you zoom out really far, there's really no populated centers around here. I mean, like hundreds of miles away to the west, there's this, and then hundreds of miles to the south, there's French Polynesia. And if you go way up to the north, still part of the Line Islands, you get that classic island in Kiribati that everyone talks about with the silly names like Banana, Poland, London, Paris. It's kind of a sidetrack, but at first I didn't know how to pronounce this. The island is listed as Kiribati, but I remembered that you're supposed to pronounce the T-I as S, so I was pronouncing as Carisimas, but it's actually just Christmas Island.
Christmas.
Anyways, let's go back to our article. Some of the islands near there are Malden, Starbuck, Caroline, and Flint, which are also islands part of Kiribati. It seems like Vostok was spared from a lot of the other colonization that happened on these other islands. Starbuck and Flint Island, those islands were heavily exploited for their guano. A lot of other islands in those Line Islands were, like Jarvis Island, which is part of the United States today. Looking at its history, Vostok was discovered by Russian explorer Bellingshausen, who sighted it on August 3rd, 1820 on his ship Vostok. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because on my last video about Peter the First Island, we talked about this exact same guy who discovered Peter the First Island, also around that exact same year. So I wonder if this is one of his stops on his way down to Antarctica. And then, like a lot of these islands around here, is seen by a lot of whalers, but no one really landed on it. And then someone tried to land on it in 1841, but it wasn't very easy to land on it. And then in 1879, an 800-ton, 3-masted British vessel called Takatia was wrecked on it. It didn't seem like they spent much time on this island. I couldn't find many stories online referencing this shipwreck, but it appears that they got off the island pretty quickly on their small boats and headed to Tahiti later. And then in the late 1880s, the British looked at this to possibly harvest guano off of, but they gave up on that. And then there was a long time where no one really cared about this place. Till 1924, Captain Andy Thomas came around here. They mentioned on the southwest side of an island, there's a boat passage there, which there is a picture of later in this video that I found in a newspaper. But anyway, let's keep reading about the story. They were rowing in small boats and they saw a bunch of black sharks around there. Captain Andy said the sharks were so numerous and so voracious that they leapt for the oars and bit at them savagely. One of them forced me to get out of the water in a hurry. They're the most aggressive sharks I've ever seen. I would recommend not swimming around this place, but anyway, let's keep reading. Captain Andy and the crew found that the vegetation was limited. There are a few plants, beach vines, coarse grasses, and a grassy strip. A bunch of those Pisonia trees, which cover the entire interior of the island. The soil was rich, deep black, and heavily loaded with guano. And this was a visit in 1924, but they saw a lot of native brown rats and a bunch of coconut crabs too. They planted a bunch of coconuts and then they headed out of there. And 10 years later, Captain Andy and that same crew came back. So apparently in that 10 years, a violent storm had swept the island and a lot of the trees had been knocked down and uprooted. And they found that there were no rats on their return there, which is interesting. And all of those coconut trees that they planted were gone. So something that Captain Andy mentioned was there was a big storm that knocked over a bunch of the trees. It is possible that there was a big storm or maybe even a fire right before this photo was taken. I don't think that's as likely as some of the other explanations that I'll explore. It is possible that that could be contributing a little bit to this weird image. Oh, just an interesting tidbit. I was scrolling down to see if there's anything else in this article, and there's an advertisement for asbestos cement, how they're doing wonderful things. This was written in 1966, so keep that in mind, but it's kind of wild looking back at some of these articles to see what was advertised. I also found this video from National Geographic from years ago where this guy actually dove around Vostok Island, and he gets a couple shots of the back. It doesn't appear to have that black hole appearance. A lot of cool fish around there, as well as some sharks. I wish this video was longer, but it's only 36 seconds long. They don't really show any of the interior of the island. I then found this article from the Honolulu Star Advertiser, May 30th, 1948, titled Incident at Vostok Island. And it's the story of these two guys that traveled to Vostok Island. They talked a lot about the sharks in the area too. That seems to be a reoccurring theme on this place. They found themselves in semi-darkness under the majestic buka trees, 75 feet tall, so close together and so uniform in height that they completely shut off the sun. That's very similar from what Captain Andy said in the 1920s and 30s, that the trees interlocked each other and shut off the sun. They also mentioned that after walking around the island, which is pretty small, there was nothing to indicate that people had ever lived there before, not even any traces, rock piles, flagstones, or foundations of houses. They also mentioned the sharks. First to greet us were a dozen red snappers, followed by 3 6-foot sharks. Sam made a jab at one of them with his oar, but the shark refused to be scared. And then after this, they also bailed to Tahiti. Seems like that's a popular place after visiting Vostok. Here's another article from the Honolulu Star Advertiser, May 6, 1940. It's just an article talking about Vostok Island and some of the history. They give a really cool map of it. It shows that boat passage on the southwest side that was referenced earlier, and then the interior of these Pisonia trees with the gravel beach on the outside. One interesting thing that they note in this that I didn't see in anything else was they say this type of vegetation is very distinctive, being found also on Rose Islet. When I search Google Maps, there's only 2 Rose Islets. One of them is in the Philippines and one of them is in Canada. It seems like they're talking about the one in the Philippines, which is a really, really tiny islet. Very similar looking trees up there. This one's a lot closer to civilization and has some pictures of people plus buildings there. And another article I found from the Tomorrow Herald, July 19th, 1902. They have this article at Islands Without Owners. They talk about a bunch of different places, and one of them they talk about is Vostok Island. They say, it would suit you excellently if you are a family man. For here, there's not one ownerless house, but several, although the place is quite uninhabited. At first I was confused that they meant there are houses there, but no one lives there, but I think they're referring to the other islands around that area instead of a literal house being there. because I had not found anything about house being on Vostok Island and all the research I did. Anyways, so what's the true answer of why Vostok Island appears to be a black hole? Well, I think the Google Maps satellite that took this photo just took a really bad photo, and the exposure or one of the settings was way off. And I don't think anyone's trying to censor anything, because when you come to Apple Maps, you can clearly see just a normal island here with nothing censored out. A lot of Pacific islands on Google Maps for some reason are really bright. Like McKean Island just looks like a big orb, but when you look at an Apple Maps, it looks pretty much normal. So I think that's what's going on. A lot of people online say the Pisonia trees are what gives it this black look, but while those trees are very numerous on this island, I don't think they're giving it this distinctive look on Google Maps necessarily. I think it has more to do with just the imagery itself. Anyways, that's the end of this video. I'm trying to go back to the style of some of my earlier videos where it's more conversational and inquisitive, where we look at primary and secondary sources together and try to figure stuff out, instead of me just reading a script about a story. So let me know if you like this style of video more. It's definitely a bit quicker for me to produce, so I can make more of these videos for you guys, but I still want the quality to be high and all the information to be accurate in these videos for you guys. Anyways, thanks for watching.